Have you ever felt like success was crushing you instead of bringing peace? In this video, you will discover how a businessman on the verge of collapse found a new way of living by disconnecting from chaos and learning valuable lessons from a monk. Here, you'll follow Bob's journey, an entrepreneur who, at the height of his career, realizes that his success means nothing without balance. The wisdom of a monk guides him through a profound transformation, one that may be the key for you to find serenity amid daily pressure. Stay until the end and see how small shifts in your perspective can bring an inner peace that goes far beyond financial results. Bob clenched his hands, feeling the weight of the anxiety that had built up over the past few weeks. As a businessman, his success was unquestionable. His company was thriving, and his career had become a symbol of achieved ambition. However, that victory came at a cost. His routine had turned into a frenzied race of endless meetings, impossible deadlines, and decisions that couldn't wait. The constant pressure of leading a team and delivering results left Bob feeling exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The sound of his phone never stopped, notifications buzzing with urgent requests and problems that needed immediate resolution. He was always surrounded by people, yet the feeling of isolation grew more intense. Even moments of rest brought no relief. His mind remained stuck on work, unable to relax. Then, during an important meeting, something inside him broke. Bob found himself unable to continue. The conference room, usually a battleground he confidently dominated, now felt suffocating. He needed to leave, almost running, abandoning everything behind. It was the breaking point he never imagined facing, but he knew that if he didn't do something, that pressure would destroy him. That's when a colleague suggested something unexpected, a retreat at a mountain temple. The colleague mentioned Monk Jin, someone he had sought out during his own time of crisis. "He has a way of making us see beyond the chaos," were the words that echoed in Bob's mind. With no other options, Bob drove to the temple, a place of serenity far removed from the noise of his life. Upon arriving, the scene was unlike anything he had ever known. The soft sound of the wind through the trees, the distant singing of birds, and the comforting silence of the space enveloped him in a way he didn't realize he needed. Entering the temple, he was greeted by Monk Jin, a man of serene appearance, with eyes that seemed to carry deep wisdom. Monk Jin observed him calmly, unhurried, before speaking. "Monk Jin, you seem to be burdened by a load that grows heavier by the day. What brought you to this place?" Bob hesitated, his voice still tense, but he felt he could no longer hide the truth. "Bob, I can't take it anymore. No matter how much I do, there's always more to be done. I need a solution." Monk Jin kept his gaze fixed, as if waiting for more, yet not sensing any urgency to rush the conversation. Instead, his silence allowed Bob to begin hearing his own inner voice, perhaps for the first time in a long while. "And what do you believe really needs to be done?" Bob fell silent, feeling that this was only the first of many questions that would force him to think beyond the obvious. The footsteps of Bob and Monk Jin echoed softly along the stone path, winding through the temple's garden. The air was fresh, and the scent of damp earth and surrounding leaves created an atmosphere that somehow invited silence and reflection. The noise of the city seemed like a distant memory, and for the first time in a long while, Bob didn't feel like he was racing against time. As they walked, Bob began to speak. He unloaded about the endless demands of clients, employees who expected solutions for everything, and the market fluctuations that left no room for rest. His voice carried the weight of years of unexpressed pressure, a mixture of frustration and fatigue. Monk Jin walked beside him, listening attentively without interrupting, letting Bob release the layers of thoughts that seemed to pile up like heavy stones on his shoulders. The monk waited for the right moment to intervene, knowing that Bob's answers would only emerge when he was ready to listen to himself. After a long pause, Monk Jin finally broke the silence, his voice as calm as the flow of a river. "Monk Jin, you hear many voices throughout the day. Clients, employees, the market. But when was the last time you stopped to listen to your own voice?" Bob furrowed his brow, unsure of how to respond right away. The idea of listening to his own voice seemed strange, even distant. He was so used to responding to external needs that he had never asked himself what he actually wanted or needed. "Bob, my voice? I don't know. I guess I'm so caught up in what others expect that I've never thought about it." The monk nodded slightly, as if he had expected that answer. They continued to walk, the gentle sound of birds filling the air around them. "And what would your own voice say right now if you gave it the chance to be heard?" Bob paused for a moment, his eyes fixed on the stone path beneath him. The monk's question had caught him off guard. He had never considered that his own voice was there, waiting, suffocated by so many others. What would it say? What would he say to himself if he had the space and time to speak? The silence between them was comfortable, yet heavy with meaning. Bob began to realize that, for so long, his actions had been reactions to external pressures. He had never stopped to ask himself what he truly wanted or what made him happy. And at that moment, he realized that perhaps, deep down, he didn't know the answer anymore. Monk Jin didn't push for an immediate response, but simply walked in silence alongside Bob, allowing him to begin asking the questions he had long avoided. Monk Jin stopped in front of a small stream that flowed gently, its crystal-clear waters reflecting the soft sunlight. The sound of the flowing water was almost hypnotic, a perfect contrast to the whirlwind of thoughts in Bob's mind. The monk remained silent for a few moments, letting the sound of the stream fill the space between them, like an intentional pause in the conversation. With a serene gaze, Monk Jin broke the silence with a calm and deep voice. "Monk Jin, look at this river, flowing peacefully. It follows its course, without holding on to the stones it encounters along the way." Bob watched the water, intrigued. It was such a simple sight, yet full of meaning. He noticed the stones in the riverbed, some small, some large, some almost submerged, others partially visible. None seemed to disrupt the flow of the water. Monk Jin continued, his tone almost meditative. "Monk Jin, now imagine if this river tried to carry all the stones around it, forcing itself to hold on to everything it encountered. What would happen?" Bob reflected for a moment before responding, his words coming out slowly, as if he were gradually grasping the metaphor. "Bob, it would stop, weighed down." The monk nodded gently, pleased with Bob's answer. There was a simple wisdom in his words, but one that somehow seemed deeper as Bob processed it. "Monk Jin, so it is with your life. You are trying to carry every stone you encounter, every demand and expectation. What would it be like if you let the weight flow, like the river?" Bob remained silent, watching the constant movement of the water. He began to realize how many stones, responsibilities, deadlines, other people's expectations he had been accumulating without noticing. Each one seemed essential in the moment he encountered it. But now, standing before that scene, he began to question if he truly needed to hold on to all of them. The monk didn't press for an immediate response, knowing that Bob's understanding would come at the right time. The river metaphor had planted a seed of reflection, and now it was time for Bob to let it grow. What will you choose to let flow, Bob?" The question lingered in the air, like a gentle breeze, waiting for Bob to find the answer within himself over time. The two of them approached a large rock by the river's edge and sat down. The sound of the gently flowing water served as a backdrop for the new layer of thoughts beginning to surface in Bob's mind. He still felt the weight of his worries, but now, sitting beside the monk, he seemed more willing to face what had been consuming him for so long. Bob took a deep breath before confessing what haunted him most, his voice breaking with uncertainty. "Bob, what scares me the most is that if I stop pushing so hard, everything might fall apart. I'm afraid of failing." Monk Jin remained silent for a few seconds, absorbing Bob's words with a deep calm. His gaze was firm yet kind, as if he already knew the path Bob needed to walk. Without haste, he asked the question that would begin to dismantle the fear Bob had been carrying. "Monk Jin, you've built your life with such care, but tell me, what does failure mean to you?" Bob looked at the monk, momentarily confused. He had never truly stopped to reflect on the exact definition of failure. For him, it had always been a shadow that followed him, but was never named. Finally, he replied, his voice a little lower, as if confessing a secret. "Bob, failure is losing everything. The money, the respect, the business." The monk listened attentively, but in his eyes was a calm curiosity, as if he were waiting for something deeper. "And if all of that disappears tomorrow, who would you be without those things? What would remain of you?" The question hung in the air, almost like a dense mist, and Bob felt his heart tighten. He had never considered his identity without external achievements. To him, material success was a reflection of who he was. But now, faced with that simple question, he was forced to confront himself in a way he never had before. If everything disappeared, What would be left? Who would he be without his company? Without the status, the money, the respect he had worked so hard for? Was there an identity beyond all that? The doubt consumed him, but along with it came a small spark of understanding. Maybe he had built his life around pillars that, deep down, didn't define who he truly was. Monk Jin watched him, unhurried, allowing that new reflection to take root within Bob. He knew the answers wouldn't come immediately, but that the question would start to unravel something essential. Monk Jin, failure, Bob, only exists when we define success narrowly, but there is a greater truth to be discovered. Who are you without those achievements? What part of you will never be touched by loss? Bob, though still without clear answers, felt that the path to finding them had been opened. Monk Jin guided Bob to a Zen garden, where the contrast between the stones and the empty spaces created a quiet harmony. The arrangement was simple, almost minimalist, but there was a serene order that conveyed peace. Bob observed the garden for a moment, trying to absorb the calm emanating from the scene, a place where everything seemed to be in perfect balance. Monk Jin approached one of the larger stones and turned to Bob, his voice soft yet full of purpose. Monk Jin, do you see this garden? Each stone is in the right place, but the space between them is just as important as the stones. What do you see? Bob looked more closely, noticing for the first time the empty spaces between the stones, something that had seemed insignificant before but now captured his attention. He reflected for a moment, searching for an answer that felt true to what he was experiencing. It's simple. It's not overcrowded, but everything has its place. Monk Jin nodded, pleased with Bob's answer, but he knew the reflection wasn't yet complete. He moved closer to the center of the garden and, with a slow gesture, drew an imaginary circle in the air around one of the smaller stones. Just like in life, sometimes the space to breathe is just as important as the tasks you complete. What are you missing by not leaving space in your life? The question lingered, and Bob felt the weight of its truth. He had been filling his life with work, commitments, and pressures. Every minute was packed with things to do, with no space to think, no space just to be. He wasn't making room for rest, reflection, or even the simple moments of joy he once appreciated. Bob, I don't leave space for myself. I'm always rushing, trying to do more, without stopping to think about what really matters. Monk Jin watched him closely, seeing that understanding was beginning to surface on Bob's face. He knew that the process of change would be gradual, but this was the moment to plant the idea of balance, that success isn't just about what you achieve, but also about the space you create to live. Monk Jin, the simplicity of the now, Bob, is what brings clarity. It's not about how many stones you move, but the balance you find by leaving space for life to breathe. Bob remained silent, absorbing the words. He was starting to understand that perhaps by simplifying, by leaving space in his life, he could finally find the balance and peace he had been searching for. As they walked back through the temple, the gentle sound of the wind in the trees continued to fill the air with a sense of tranquility. Bob felt that something within him was changing, as if the monk's words were beginning to dissolve old certainties he had held onto for so long. The weight he carried no longer seemed so unbearable, and he began to open himself to the possibility of a new way of living, of thinking. Bob, I think I've always seen success as something external. Money, respect, but it's not bringing me peace. Monk Jin, with a calm expression, walked beside him, allowing Bob's words to flow without interruption. When he sensed Bob was ready for another question, he spoke softly, almost like a meditation. Success is what fills your heart, not your bank account. What fills your heart now? The question echoed in Bob's mind. For so long, he had confused outward shine with true inner fulfillment. The respect of others, status, material possessions. Suddenly, it all felt superficial. But when he tried to answer what truly filled his heart, he hesitated. Bob, I guess I've never thought of it that way. Maybe it's time to think about what really matters, not just what others expect of me. Monk Jin smiled softly. Bob was beginning to understand what he had known for a long time. True success is the kind that brings peace, not the kind that impresses the world. The path to understanding begins with the humility to recognize the emptiness of superficial achievements. Monk Jin, the humility to acknowledge that is the first step toward finding real peace. What will you choose to put at the center of your life now? Bob took a deep breath, as if a new door had opened within him. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to contemplate the idea of success that wasn't measured in numbers or applause, but in what truly made sense to him. Perhaps it was the time spent with his family, the quiet moments he had neglected, or even the freedom of not always having to prove something to others. He knew the answer wouldn't come immediately, but he was starting to realize that to find peace, he would need to completely redefine what success meant to him. It was no longer about meeting external expectations, but about discovering what truly mattered. Bob, I think I'm going to start thinking about that, what really fills my heart. Monk Jin looked at Bob with a glint in his eye, pleased with the journey he was beginning to walk. He knew this was only the start, but Bob now had the tools to move toward a life of more balance and meaning. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the temple, Bob and Monk Jin reached the end of their walk. The fresh air and the quiet stillness of the place mirrored Bob's state of mind. Though still carrying doubts, he felt lighter. The day's conversations and reflections had planted a new seed in his heart, a perspective he knew he would need to cultivate over time. Bob looked at the monk, his face now less tense, and smiled calmly, something he hadn't done in a long time. Bob, there's still a lot of work to be done, but I feel like now I know where to start. Monk Jin, as always, listened attentively. He knew that inner journeys don't end in a definitive way, but unfold in small, everyday changes. Bob had begun to understand this, but the path was still being mapped out. Monk Jin, the path to peace isn't in the absence of challenges, but in how you carry them. What will your next step be? The question made Bob reflect. He thought of all the stones he had tried to carry over the years, all the pressures and expectations he had accepted without question. Now, he knew he didn't have to hold on to them anymore. The river's flow, the garden's simplicity, it was all connected to a new way of approaching life. Bob, I think I'll learn to let the stones stay where they are and focus more on the river's flow. Monk Jin smiled gently, knowing that Bob had grasped the essential lesson. Then, you've already begun to walk. The monk's words, as always, were few but profound. Bob realized that the next step wouldn't be a grand achievement, but a series of small gestures, conscious choices that would allow him to live with more lightness, more peace, and less emotional weight. He knew the road ahead would still bring challenges, but now he had the tools to face them differently. Bob said goodbye to Monk Jin, grateful for the lessons and the questions that helped him find his own answers. As he left the temple, he felt that although the challenges still remained, he was better equipped to face them. Not with excessive effort, but with the serenity of someone who understands the flow of life. And so, Bob began his journey, one step at a time, leaving the stones behind and following the course of his own inner river. If this video gave you new perspectives, don't forget to give it a like and share it with someone who might also be in need of more balance in life. And of course, subscribe to the channel to continue your journey of growth and discover more transformative content. We're in this together, seeking a life with more peace and purpose.